So one of the principles of the Dhamma that I learned and teach is the importance of living with integrity. And when we live with integrity, it gives a basis for our mind to be able to focus and concentrate. We can live without remorse. We have less confusion when things arise as to what we need to do in order, what kind of choices we need to make. And it gives us a kind of rootedness and groundedness to be able to move forward in our life. And I remember I was at the monastery and Ajahn Pasano was there and he was on retreat. So Ajahn Pasano was a senior monk. He had been the abbot at Wat Pah Nanachat for many years. And the year before Ajahn Chah's memorial, he had been involved with getting the monastery set up for the state funeral. So, Ajahn Chah was a famous teacher, and probably there were maybe, at a large gathering, there would be maybe 2,000 people that would come at a time. But his funeral was going to be 500,000 people. And so they had like orders of magnitude of infrastructure that they needed to set up. So after a year of working 15, 16, 18 hours a day, Ajahn Pasano had a sabbatical for a year and he came to Chithurst. So he was in Chithurst while I was living there. And I remember something came up. I think somebody had made a drink for us at our midnight session, and it didn't have one of the ingredients wasn't allowable. And so I went to Ajahn Pasano, how do you deal with the dilemma? Somebody has offered this drink, they've put time into it, it's made with love, and it's got something in it that we're not allowed to have. And there was just like zero hesitation. It's got something and not allowable, we don't have it. It's like there was not even a nanosecond of trying to figure out how do you deal with this. It was just clear. And what struck me about that situation was the clarity and the rootedness and the fact that he just went back to the standard as like the place where you go to as how you negotiate or how you deal with or how you decide, something that ends up being like, for many of us, a gray zone. How do you navigate the difference between the kindness and the generosity of the person's offering and the fact that what they've given is not in accordance with the monastic code of conduct of what we're allowed to have at this time? And him, it was, there was no thinking. And even though that was a very minor point in terms of, whether the drink we should or we shouldn't, what wasn't minor was the clarity and the determination to stay true to what the monastic code was, what the discipline was, as a reference point for how to make decisions. That wasn't a minor point. And so in these last many years when I was, dealing with coming out of the monastery, and I don't know how many of you have listened to the talk that I recorded and posted, but I recorded and posted a talk that talks about my experience and the challenges of it. And I was coming from a place of integrity, which was the reason why I wasn't willing to participate in something that seemed to me that was based on a power move. It was not based in the well-being of the nuns, and that my intuition was that there was nothing about this that was going to be healthy. It was actually quite destructive. So my intuition said no, and I knew what I was doing was risky for all kinds of reasons, because the big teacher was activated, and it was a very, very risky thing. But my intuition was, it doesn't matter what the consequences are. In the marrow of your bones, this is not healthy. And under no circumstances are you going to participate. Like, absolutely, categorically, no way. And up until that point, certainly I had had clarity about things, but not that kind of conviction where it's like, I know with certainty, I am not going to do this, and it doesn't matter what the consequences are, because I know doing this is wrong. Well, that kind of conviction made it possible for me to go forward and be clear about not participating, and the consequences were devastating. I mean, I lost my community, I lost my teacher, I lost just about everything, and I struggled a lot. But I never broke my commitment to harmlessness. And so even though I struggled, and even though there was lots of unwholesome or unpleasant mind states, I never broke my commitment to harmlessness. And so eventually, after many, many years and many different things, including doing attachment work, and including, it was the attachment work where there was a really big turning. And I could begin to see the pattern in what was so harmful in the system. And I came through the other side and had clarity about what had happened and could speak about it. And then I recognized, even though it was incredibly risky, and even though I lost almost everything, I never compromised my integrity. And that not compromising my integrity gave me a ground to process things that were incredibly challenging in terms of like the reality of what happened in my life, and the kinds of territory that I was navigating in terms of the impact on me personally and on my identity and what I believed and who I belonged to and where I felt safe, all those things. The fact that I hadn't compromised my integrity, the fact that I stayed true, that I didn't do something that I knew was harmful, even though it had a very big impact, showed me another level of what it means when you hold integrity as your ground, in a way that no amount of theory and no amount of teaching and no amount of living in the monastery had up until that point showed me. Because what I could see in that context was that when you make a solid commitment to not harm and are willing to stay by that, even when things go south, go wrong, in a very big way, and there's enormous consequences that you have to deal with personally, you can come back to the fact that you actually were in congruence with your values. And that congruence with your values can support you to come back into balance as you're navigating something that had devastating consequences. And so, when we talk about precepts, or when we recite precepts, or when we read precepts, it's not the sexiest thing about our meditation practice. Having boundaries and clarity about what we do or we don't do is not usually where we all feel like melting and juicy and our heart opening and like, all the stuff that we can think about when we're thinking about awakening is not usually what we're experiencing when we're reaffirming our precepts, or when we're talking about precepts, or when we're talking about ethical dilemmas. But what we don't always see is that when we do that, when we make precepts and ethical living a foundation of our life, then what happens is it gives us a kind of strength that is almost impossible to be able to put in words, because we don't have language for what that actually gives us. The only thing that I can say as an example is that when I first went to Amravati had been a school that had been built for children to get out of London in the war. And so the buildings were more like kind of like barracks, for kids. And over the decades, many decades, the monastery, took away some of the buildings and built a Dhamma hall and made it like a very beautiful monastery. And so I was there when they were digging up the pavement or the tarmac for the courtyard for the children to play, and they were putting in the foundations for the temple. And they had a backhoe and a guy who was using the jackhammer to take up the tarmac. And there was nothing about that was sexy. The guy on the jackhammer, he was doing it like 8 hours a day, And I asked him, because initially when I heard that hammer, I was so aggravated because it's like, I'm here meditating. I don't want to hear this noise. And then I went and I talked to him and I said, how many hours does it take you to stop shaking after you finish your day? He says 6 hours. And I thought, my inconvenience with the sound pales in comparison to what it would be to be shaking for 6 hours after you finish this, And then the guy on the backhoe, and so then he was digging trenches, and because the soil was clay and I don't know what else, the trenches had to be the deepest it was the worst possible soil conditions to have a stable foundation for the temple. So they were like 18 feet deep, like they were serious trenches, not minor trenches, serious trenches. And so none of that is sexy. Like it just simply isn't sexy about the preparation that's needed in order to lay the foundations, in order to support the building that is going to be a beautiful Dharma hall. It's just not sexy. But if you cut corners with the foundations, then the temple walls won't stay up and the roof won't stay up. And so the same is true with our own practice. If we don't have a deep commitment to integrity, if we don't have foundations that are rooted, then when we're in these positions, which inevitably we will be, about, having to choose between this or that, and whether it's in accordance with our values or we're doing something that's different, we need to have something that's really rooted in order to help us. And when we have something that's really rooted, then sometimes things become clearer, even if it is, like in my case, it had a really big impact. It wasn't at all easy. And so precepts then become a really important part of our life, and something that's important to reflect on, and something that's important to consider, what are the ethical issues that we're dealing with and how are we dealing with them, and are we in our own closed loop about it, or are we in conversation with other people about it, and are the other people we're in conversation with, do they share our values? And how is this integrating into our meditation life and our Dharma life? So one of the things that was of value in living in a monastery that is less easy when we're living as civilians out of a monastery is that in the monastery, every 2 weeks, we would go through and recite our rules, our precepts. And we had a process of clearing things that we had transgressed. And as lay people, we don't have structures like that. We don't have opportunities where we review the precepts, where we speak about issues that are coming up, about things, that choices that we've made, or places where we feel we have some lack of congruence or coherence or a sense of something might be out of integrity. And then we assume as lay people that we can go ahead and teach the Dhamma endlessly without actually having any support for where we are with our integrity. And I don't know that that's a good balance. I don't know that that's a helpful way of looking. So maybe what I can do now, I'm just going to pause and see if I can pull up the precepts for teachers, and we can go through them together. I haven't prepared, so it's going to take me a minute to find them. Okay, not too far. Okay, great. Didn't take too long. So here we have the ethical and Jedi agreements, long and short precepts and Zoom guidelines. So part of this is developing a culture that supports being inclusive. So how about if we take it in turns reading, we just cycle through and read. I'll start, and then Natalia, and then Truett, and then we keep reading all the way through. Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So try it on. Be willing to try on new ideas or ways of doing things that might not be what you prefer or are familiar with.
Practice self-focus. Attend to and speak about your own experiences and responses. Do not speak for a whole group or express assumptions about the experience of others.
Understand the difference between intent and impact. Try to understand and acknowledge impact. Denying the impact of something said by focusing on intent is often more destructive than the initial interaction. Good intentions are not enough. Listen and learn from the impact.
Practice both and. When speaking, substitute and for but. This practice acknowledges and honors multiple realities.
Refrain from blaming or shaming self and others. Practice giving skillful feedback.
Move up, move back. Encourage full participation by all present. Take note of who is speaking and who is not. If you tend to speak often, consider moving back, and vice versa.
Practice mindful listening. Try to avoid planning what you'll say as you listen to others, being willing to be surprised, to learn something new, to listen with your whole self.
Confidentiality. Take home learnings, but don't identify anyone other than yourself now or later. If you want to follow up with anyone regarding something they said in this session, ask first and respect their wishes.
Right to pass. You can say I pass if you don't wish to speak.
Awakening Truth Inquiry Practice Guidelines. Inquiry is supported by the following qualities and insight dialogue guidelines. Respect self and others. Show up and lean into vulnerability. Make a commitment to safety, honesty, and coherence of the group. Use active listening, non-judgmental observation. Hear and notice, but don't scrutinize. Speak without intention to fix or do therapy. Use I statements that speak from your direct experience. Take care of yourself. Share as much or as little as you choose. Signal if you don't want to answer a question. Do not repeat personal shares.
Pause, self, partner, or group if something is keeping you from being fully present. Pause. We turn attention to our body, drop social conventions about what we are supposed to do or be. We turn attention to what is.
Relax.
Relax.
Oh,
Ah,
sorry. Go
apologies.
ahead.
It might be your turn.
Sorry. Relax. We relax our body. We relax our resistance to what is.
Open to awareness, we move between internal and external focus.
Trust emergence. We practice letting go, befriending impermanence.
Listen deeply. We receive the content and the deep meaning of what is shared with kindness and openness.
Speak the truth. We pause to know what's true in our own experience, and we speak it with clarity, kindness, and economy.
Learn precepts. We aim to create a community that is based in safety, respect, and diversity, equity, inclusivity, and accessibility. This allows us to grow and develop together, and for all parts of our lives to be included in our spiritual practice. Affirm precepts and guidelines regularly supports our intention towards non-harm and our positive aspiration towards life-sustaining practices. For this reason, long and short precepts have been offered.
Ethical conduct and positive commitments based on the 5 precepts. Honoring life. Aware of the violence in the world and the power of nonviolent resistance, I stand in the presence of ancestors, the earth, and future generations and commit to refrain from causing harm. I cultivate the compassion that seeks to protect each living being.
2, honoring stewardship and trustworthiness, aware of the poverty and greed in the world and the abundance of the earth. I stand in the presence of the ancestors, the earth, and future generations, and commit to refrain from taking what is not given and more than I need. I cultivate a life of simplicity, gratitude, and generosity.
3. Honoring healthy sexual relations, aware of the abuses and lovelessness in the world and the healing that is made possible with love. I stand in the presence of ancestors, the earth, and future generations, and commit to refrain from creating harm through misuse of sexuality. I cultivate respect for beauty and the erotic power of our bodies.
4. Honoring honesty, aware of falsehood and deception in the world, and the power of living and speaking the truth. I stand in the presence of ancestors, the earth, and future generations, and commit to refrain from false and divisive speech and harmful gossip. I cultivate the ability to listen and to practice clarity and integrity in all that I communicate by my words and actions.
5, honoring mindfulness, aware of the desecration of the world and my responsibility for life as it manifests through me. I stand in the presence of the ancestors, the earth, and future generations, and commit to refrain from misuse of all forms of intoxicants and addictive behaviors that cause heedlessness or loss of awareness. I cultivate right action and honor health and well-being for my body, heart, mind, communities, and the planet. So this composition is an amalgamation from Awakening Truth, Manzanita Village, the Mindfulness Meditation Teacher Certificate Program precepts, and the Theravadan 5 precepts. That's the short. Then this is the short form of how to do this in Pali. We chant the Namo Tassa 3 times and then recite them in Pali. And then Zoom practices. And we don't have the practices here for teachers. The expanded version for teachers, which has got a little bit more nuanced about some of these things. But maybe this is enough for us for now, and we can just pause here and see if it would be helpful to just have a little bit of a discussion. Let me just pause the recording. So what I'd like to invite you to do is to join me and recite Namo Tassa, which is homage to the Buddha, and then we can go from there. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. So this homage is homage to the Blessed, Noble, and Perfectly Enlightened One. And so if we just come into our own experience of our intention to live with harmlessness, our intention to practice, our intention to awaken, our intention to do what we need to do so that we become whole, healthy humans and relate as a whole, healthy human with others. We can bring to mind the image of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and our teachers. We can bring to mind the power of the teachings, the Dhamma. And we can bring to mind our community, the Sangha, the people that we have practiced with, people that we continue to practice with. We can bring to mind our peers, our mentors, so that we feel ourselves surrounded by community, holding us, seeing us, witnessing us, mirroring us, supporting us. And in this field of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, we can bring to mind anything that we have done by body, speech, or mind that has caused harm in any way, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and ask for forgiveness. For anything that I have done intentionally or unintentionally, through my action, through what I've said, or through what I haven't said, that has caused harm in any way, I ask for forgiveness now. And for a second time, if there's anything that I have done intentionally or unintentionally, through what I've said, through what I've done, or through what I haven't said, that has caused harm in any way, I ask for forgiveness now. And for a third time, if there is anything that I have done that has caused harm in any way, through what I've said or through what I've done or through what I've thought, that has caused harm intentionally or unintentionally, I ask for forgiveness now. And because we recognize that sometimes the hardest person to forgive is ourself, and because we recognize that there are others who have also done things intentionally or unintentionally that have harmed us, then we can also bring forward the intention to forgive. So the intention to forgive does not absolve people of responsibility and accountability. It means that we're no longer willing to be burdened and enslaved by the harm. And that the actual forgiveness sometimes takes as long as it takes to ripen, but we can set forward the intention. So if I have experienced harm in any way, intentionally or unintentionally, through speech or action, I offer forgiveness now. If I experienced harm in any way, through something I have done myself or others have done to me, intentionally or unintentionally, I extend forgiveness now. If I have experienced harm in any way, through things that were said or thought, spoken or done, intentionally or unintentionally, I extend forgiveness now. Thank you.
May you go away from this retreat filled with clarity, understanding, integrity, and love. May you learn to look at yourself with the eyes of understanding and acceptance. May you be demanding and trying to strive to achieve your best, but not too harsh. May you be ready to be forgiving of yourself and of others. May you bring joy, softness, and all the good feelings of this day into the world, into your community, and to yourself. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. There's kind of like this quiet love fest happening. No words, nobody wants to do anything. We just want to sit and look at each other. It's very sweet. Very sweet.
This was so lovely. Thank you both.
It really was. Really lovely. Thank you.
Thank you both.
I'm going to stop the recording